Hey guys, so as you're probably aware, I've done quite a few recovery stories here on the channel for conditions like chronic fatigue syndrome, long COVID, POTS, fibromyalgia, Lyme disease, and all those sorts of related conditions. And when I first started doing the interviews, Jeffrey, my husband, would be really excited and curious after them when he got home to ask me how the people recovered. And in time, he just stopped asking because the answer just became always some sort of version, for the most part, of the same thing. People were doing some sort of brain training, they were working with their nervous system, and it became almost sort of like a joke. Not that recovery is a joke, but he'd say, "How did they recover?" And I'd say, "Yes." And that's what it was. So I know this isn't the answer for everybody, and for some people, even when this does work, it's just a piece of their puzzle. But there's no denying that brain training and working with the nervous system has been incredibly successful for a lot of people. So in this video, we're going to dive into two massive components of this to help you to be successful with this. There is a 1-2 punch that happens with brain training. In every brain training program out there, in every video of mine that you're going to see on this topic, it always addresses two things. The first is education. Always has to start with education. You have to understand what's happening and how and why these things work to really know how to use them effectively and for them to be effective. And then the second piece is having an actual brain training strategy to use. So that's what we're going to do here. Do not skip through the education piece at the beginning. It's really interesting. I promise you, I'm going to share some fascinating stuff. Really helps you to understand how and why all of this is happening, and will help you to be more successful with this, hopefully in the end. And then the second part, I'm going to walk you through step by step a brain training activity that you can consider trying for your own health recovery. And just before we dive in, I want to give a shout out to Raelan. Raelan, if you are watching, thank you for becoming a channel member. There is something new on the channel here where you can join the channel and for $3 become a supporter of the channel and help to continue to make all of these videos, the recovery videos, and everything that happens here on this channel possible. If you look below the video, right next to the subscribe button, there is a join button. And if you do decide to join, I thank you for the support and you will get immediate access to perks that no one else gets. So, brain training. Understanding it is the vital first step. Not only does it help to demystify all of this, but it better equips us to be able to use these strategies more effectively. Because when we understand how the brain and the nervous system work, then we are more capable of retraining them to be less sensitive and respond in a more appropriate way to all of the modern day threats that they are inaccurately assessing in our environment. Things like the news, social media, Twitter, Reddit, the 8 devices we have in front of us at all times. Although these things are unpleasant, they are not immediate threats to our survival. But our brain and our nervous system, having evolved to thrive in a time that looked nothing like the environment that we live in now, is sometimes in a hypersensitive, overprotective state. And as a result, it is inaccurately coding these things as threats, and then which creates a whole sort of cascade of things happening in our body in its somewhat misguided attempt in that moment to protect us. There are many new scientific discoveries happening around this, much of it happening only just within the last about 10 years. But it's taking time for all of this to trickle down to most doctors' offices, virtually all doctors' offices, and just generally for societal views to catch up with things that we now know and understand to be true. And unless you're out there reading a bunch of medical journals or doing, have the energy, the desire, the ability to do a ton of research, or have your own YouTube channel where you get to interview neuroplasticity experts and all sorts of amazing people, then you probably aren't aware of a lot of this information. And we see it all the time in the interviews here. How many recovery stories here on this channel and in all these other spaces are talking about how they came to realize that despite how severe and unpleasant the symptoms that people were experiencing were, they weren't actually physical in origin. There wasn't anything structurally wrong with their body. They'd gotten all the tests done and everything was coming back fine. And when they did finally fully recover, it's when they started working with their brain, working with their autonomic nervous system, and reprogramming it to handle these threats more effectively. Now, brain training isn't a panacea for everything, and I fully understand that there are people out there who have chronic fatigue syndrome and long COVID who do have structural abnormalities happening in their body as well. And when those things are there, they of course need to be addressed. So what the strategies in this video are for dealing with those symptoms that are coming from the brain and an autonomic nervous system. If you have physical issues, of course, deal with them. If you get in a car accident, don't go home and do brain training. Go to the hospital, get a cast. I'm not saying that all physical symptoms and all physical issues are coming from the brain and nervous system. What I am saying is that in way more cases than we previously realized, this is where symptoms are originating. And what I'm inviting you to do in this video is to be open-minded about that, because we were not brought up and taught to think of it this way. We think of suffering in our body as happening in our body. And we also just sort of think, I think sometimes, that pain and suffering just happens. But our body, our brain, our nervous system are very smart, and they evolved to protect us, and they use a lot of pain and suffering to keep us alive. It can feel a bit like, why do I have to suffer this much? But we need to know. We need to know when we're too close to a fire. We need to know when we're touching something sharp. We need to know when we're eating something poisonous. Our body uses horrible symptoms all of the time to send us a message and to keep us alive. Okay, so in our education piece of this video, we're going to cover two really exciting, fascinating things to help us understand healing better. And the first one is neuroplasticity. And I know we're all talking about neuroplasticity more and are starting to have probably a general understanding of it, but still don't fully get it. So I'm going to give you right now some sort of interesting facts and tidbits and talking points that you can use the next time this comes up in a conversation with your family or on some social media forum. Neuroplasticity is important because it is part of what's responsible for why you might be feeling all these debilitating symptoms. And it is also the key to getting you out of it. It is the brain's incredible ability to reorganize itself and build new neural connections based on the experiences that you have. And this is happening all throughout our lives. Scientists used to think that by a certain age, this was all fixed and it was impossible to change anything. But one of the more recent scientific discoveries is that we always have the ability to make these changes by rewiring and creating new neural pathways in our brain. And this is where brain training comes in. And people are using brain training strategies, evidence-based brain training strategies, in all sorts of things these days, not just chronic fatigue syndrome or long COVID recovery, fibromyalgia, chronic pain, but also post-traumatic stress disorder, phobias, addictions, all sorts of things. And we have a new understanding of what is happening with a lot of the pain and the physical symptoms that we feel in our body. We used to think of it all as originating in the body, like if my knee hurts, then the pain is there, it's in my knee. But now what we're understanding, especially with chronic pain, that pain is actually coming from the brain, coming from the autonomic nervous system, and it's sending a signal for you to feel pain in that location to bring your attention to something. It might be hypersensitive, it might be overprotective, it might be not needed. Sometimes we get it with phantom limbs. People feel pain for limbs that aren't even there, but the brain is trying to send you a message to get your attention about something. So if you want just one simple sentence to explain to people what brain training is or what it's for, you can say brain training helps you with the things that your brain is incorrectly afraid of. And if they ask you, why is your brain incorrectly afraid of things? You tell them, well, our brain, our amygdala, our autonomic nervous system evolved to help us thrive and stay alive during a prehistoric time that looked nothing like the world that we now live in. So now we have to train it how to respond to things that it was never designed to really interpret correctly. We need to show it what is a threat and what is not. And if they're like, well, that all sounds really woo, you can say, the evidence to support this comes directly from brain imaging studies, which are showing changes in brain structure in response to these sorts of brain training activities. So if this is what's currently happening for you, if this is what is happening in your body, that there is not something physically, structurally wrong with your body, and these symptoms are a protective mechanism, a hypersensitive overdrive brain and autonomic nervous system, then a key part of this is to start really knowing and believing that your body is fine, that despite how crappy you currently feel, this is your body actually trying to protect you, and that physically you are okay. And many people are saying that, in fact, it's not even an illness that you have. You're actually not even sick. And your autonomic nervous system and your brain aren't broken. They're not doing anything wrong. They're doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing. They're just not doing it in the environment that they were trained to do it in. So the expression of that ends up being problematic. And all of this that's happening is automatic. None of this is you making choices or really registering on any conscious level any kind of fear necessarily. You're definitely not purposely giving yourself symptoms. It's helpful just to think of your brain as a computer. There is a stimulus, there is a response. It's got a program that every time it has this one stimulus, then there's going to be a response. Think of it like input X, then you get Y. Every single time. It does not deviate from its code. And with brain training, we're showing it what to do to respond differently. So stimulus response used to be one way, maybe something triggered, something being assessed as a danger. The response is physical symptoms. Now, the same stimulus we see, we don't assess it as a danger, and we have a different response, one where we feel well. Okay, you're doing really well. We have one more piece of our education section of this video before we move on to step-by-step how to do the brain training activity. And do not skip over this last part because it is really interesting. It is about the amygdala. And this might not sound super interesting straight out the gate, but I promise you that it is. It is absolutely fascinating. My head exploded when I started really understanding what the amygdala is, what it does, and all the pieces started sort of coming together for me. And I saw, it was like my light bulb moment, like, okay, I get it. I get it now. This all makes perfect sense. So the amygdala is a complex part of your brain that is involved in both emotional processing and threat assessment. It's part of your limbic system, which is involved in memory and emotion and learning. And we actually have two amygdalae. Amygdalae, I think that's the plural. We have one in each hemisphere of the brain, and they are located roughly behind the eyes. And they are actually only about the size and the shape of an almond. And fun fact, here's another talking point for you when you're telling people about this. The word amygdala actually comes from the Greek word for almond. And don't underestimate its power. Despite its small size, it is incredibly powerful. You think about some species out there, their entire brain is only the size of an almond, and that is enough to sustain them and keep them alive and run all the systems that they have in their body. So this tiny but mighty part of our brain does so much for us. Historically, the amygdala was used primarily for survival, but over time it's evolved to be more involved in emotional processing. So its role in fear processing means it's vital in helping us to respond to immediate threats in our environment. And part of that is it helps to kick off that fight, flight, or freeze response to prepare us to handle whatever threat it is that it thinks that we're facing. And now this is where it gets really interesting because our amygdala is also involved in memory, specifically memories that are strongly linked to strong emotions. So we have this part of our brain, the amazing amygdala, that is responsible for threat assessment. It's responsible for emotions, particularly historical emotions that we've experienced that are really strong. It's also responsible for learning. So think about this. It's kind of the perfect storm in our modern environment and explains why so many people who have conditions like ME/CFS, who have past trauma and then address that past trauma, find relief from their symptoms because it's all tied into the amygdala. And it also explains why some people are like, well, I didn't have past trauma, so why am I getting these symptoms? Because there's so many different things that can set it off. So we now have evidence that our gut health influences our stress responses, which adds a whole other layer of complexity in understanding our whole threat response system and suggests, once again, like so many people who have CFS and Long Covid who addressed their gut health like I did and also found that that really helped their recovery, that we can start to better understand how that all ties in. And this all even impacts our immune system. Our immune system is a part of this whole broad network of things in this puzzle of dealing with threat assessment. because when our fight or flight response is frequently triggered, it starts to impact our immunity and can make us more susceptible to catching illnesses. And I know so many of us that face these sorts of fatigue conditions find that we're catching every single little thing that comes around. So it's really tying all the puzzle pieces together, which is why I find this all so fascinating. Like, okay, this is why gut health matters. This is why the brain neural pathways matter, the fight or flight system, why the immune system is impacted, how it's all sort of creating this downward spiral of just keeping us sick. But the great news is, and one of the main takeaways from all of this, is that you have the ability to make changes, that for the most part, for most people, none of this is set in stone. And with some fairly simple but powerful strategies, you can start to turn this around. Now we're going to move into the brain training exercise. And this brain training exercise can be incredibly powerful because it specifically addresses the two main components of what we're trying to change when we're working with an overprotective and oversensitive brain and nervous system. The first one is that threat assessment and that feeling of safety. It's showing your brain and your body that you are safe, your environment is safe, and that all these things around you, although potentially unpleasant, aren't actually an immediate threat to you. And then the second component that this brain training exercise is addressing is showing you that your body is fine, internalizing, believing, knowing that despite how sick you feel, that your body is physically fine and you can trust it to do physically and mentally challenging things. None of this is saying to jump into really challenging things right away. This is a very slow, gradual process of retraining and creating those new neural pathways. But that is a core piece of what we're doing here, is just removing the fear around our own body and our own symptoms and building up that trust again that things are fine. And I get it. Some people have physical things that they are working on in their body. If this is you, I understand it. No need to send me messages telling me about your physical problems. I hear you. I believe you. What this strategy here is for is addressing that nervous system and that brain neural pathway component. Something that makes this brain training activity unique is that there are many different brain training exercises out there, and many are designed for dealing with symptom flares. So when you are feeling especially bad, you have brain training activities to pull out in those moments to help deal with and hopefully diminish those symptoms. And then another piece that a lot of brain training exercises address is the fear and the panic response that you have in your brain. So maybe you're reacting to symptoms or having spiraling negative thoughts, and you just want to catch that in the moment and then train yourself to react differently in those moments. What this brain training exercise is for is more of an overarching brain training exercise to generally work on that fear response, that feeling of safety, and that trust in your body. With doing this repeatedly over time, the goal is to get ahead of those symptoms flares before they even start, to get ahead of those spiraling thoughts before they even start, to start your day giving your brain and your autonomic nervous system the messages that it needs to be in a good state for the rest of the day. And then over time, symptoms start to decrease. You build those neural pathways in the brain, and you stop getting these physical responses being triggered in response to threats. To do this brain training exercise, what you're going to do is sit down or lie down, whatever is most comfortable for you. It's just important that while you're doing it, that you are comfortable and that you can fully relax. And you are going to set a timer. You can use your phone, you can use a meditation app like Insight Timer. Just have something that you can set and put an amount of time for this exercise of 20 minutes. So once you're sitting or lying down comfortably, you've got that timer set for 20 minutes. You're going to close your eyes and just take a few moments to just breathe. Just let your mind slowly start to settle. This is a moment to transition from whatever you were doing before this to transition into now your time for brain training, to just relax, let go of some things, and concentrate on your breath. And after you've done this for a few moments, then you're going to move into repeating a phrase. And it's a simple two-part phrase designed specifically to address those two components that we talked about, that we are working to rewire with this brain training exercise. And what this is I am safe and my body is fine. So let's go through just a couple rounds together just to really see and feel what that would look like. I'm going to say it out loud, but when you're doing this, you're going to be sitting or lying with your eyes closed, and you're going to be saying this silently to yourself in your head. So we take a breath. I am safe. My body is fine. And we keep doing this on repeat. I am safe. My body is fine. And as you think these words, really believe them. Say them as fact because they are fact. When you say, I am safe, believe it. And if you feel resistance to those words in any way, like something in your mind or body is pushing back, saying, no, I'm not safe, pay attention to what comes up for you. For me, when I do this exercise, it's a lot about finances. When I was unwell with chronic fatigue syndrome, I had to stop working, and then I was able to start working again eventually a few years later, but it was a really low-paying job, and I had pretty much filed for bankruptcy, so I had no money, no savings, no credit cards, no lines of credit, and I was living paycheck to paycheck. I was always just one paycheck away from kind of being out on the street. I had to think about every dollar I spent. And for years, I had this financial instability that was incredibly stressful. And even though I'm no longer there, it's something that's been challenging to get rid of. So when I think I am safe, what comes up for me is, no, you're not. Money, you don't have enough money. What if something happens? And I have to take those moments to really feel and internalize, I am safe. I might not be rich, I might not be wealthy, but I have enough money that it's not a threat to my survival right now. So when you're saying those words, I am safe, what comes up for you? And if there are things in your environment that are generally unsafe, if you're in an unsafe relationship or live in an unsafe environment, no amount of brain training is going to change that. And that's not what brain training is for. You're going to need to actually work on getting yourself into a safe place. But most of us actually are safe and are not in life-threatening environments when we are facing these conditions. So listen to what comes up and then feel how you really truly are safe and how these threat assessments are not valid, and just feel and remind yourself that, no, I am safe. I am fully safe. I am okay. And then the second part of that, and my body is fine, really think about those words when you say it, and think about whatever it is that comes to mind that helps you to know that and believe it to be true as you're saying it. Whether it's you've had a zillion tests done and everything's come back as fine, whether it's you've already seen progress with your health by using brain training strategies, and you can see that working with your nervous system and those neural pathways is helping to improve. That reinforces that your body is fine. Maybe it's that you were really active and healthy, and then just some seemingly simple thing triggered this inability to do any kind of exercise or anything physical. And you think, okay, I was strong one week and then not the next. This to me is another form of evidence that my body is fine. Whatever speaks to you. But when you say the words, and my body is fine, think about your body, put your mind into your body, picture it strong and healthy and good. And when your mind strays as you're doing this, as it inevitably will, that is fine. Just when you notice your thoughts going off some other direction, just gently pull them back and go back into your sentence. I am safe and my body is fine. And there is no judgment when you're doing this. There is no wrong way to do it. Don't have certain expectations about what it should look like. Just whatever you do, however you get it done, is exactly how it needs to be. And if you don't manage to do it every day or even every week, that is okay. The more you do brain training, typically the more it's going to help. But don't turn this into some sort of brain training boot camp where you get all stressed out about the activity itself, because then that is defeating what you're doing here. Think of it as a gift to yourself, something that you look forward to, this exciting tool that you have to help yourself get on that healthy path back to feeling well again. And when you're doing the brain training activity, once the timer goes off, that's time to stop saying your sentence. You don't need to keep repeating it. But before you transition back into the rest of your day, just take a few moments, like you did at the start, just to let go of what it is that you were saying and just be. Let your brain be in whatever state it wants to be in. Keep your eyes closed. Just keep breathing slowly, normally, whatever feels good, and just give yourself that moment to transition. And then when you're ready, you just open your eyes and enjoy the rest of your day. And with brain training, it's not about collecting as many different exercises as you can. Just find something that resonates for you and stick with it. Find the one thing and put your focus on it there. And if you did decide to become a channel member, thank you so much for the support. Let me know in the comments so that I can thank you. And thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you got something out of it, and I hope to see you in this next one.